Welcome back. 13 minutes ago, more truth about Alex Paxton, the one who got shot in Minnesota. More truth coming out about him. So let's go ahead and get into the comments, shall we? So let's go ahead and get to the video.
Yeah. Central Time, the Department of Homeland Security law enforcement officials and officers were conducting targeted operations in Minneapolis against an illegal alien whose criminal history included domestic assault with intentionally inflicting bodily harm, disorderly conduct, and driving without a valid license. An individual approached U.S. Border Patrol officers with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun. The officers attempted to disarm this individual, but the armed suspect reacted violently. Fearing for his life and for the lives of his fellow officers around him, an agent fired defensive shots.
So there has been another fatal shooting by immigration agents against somebody in the city of Minneapolis, who of course was protesting / interfering with an immigration operation. It has been captured on video, and Secretary Kristi Noem did something right there that I honestly, truly dislike, and that is say something that is technically, factually true, however, it gives people an improper representation of what went down in this particular scenario, which of course is going to become the topic of conversation rather than the shooting itself. Because while it is technically true that Alex Preddy, the 37-year-old ICU nurse who ultimately ended up getting killed in this instance, did in fact approach ICE agents while in possession of a semi-automatic handgun, the impression given by Kristi Noem by the way that she phrased that is that he had the gun in hand or the gun at the ready, but that is just not supported by the facts. Now, of course, we end up figuring out through watching multiple videos that the agents did in fact try to disarm him. In fact, there is video that appears to show that they did disarm him, and there may have been a malfunction with the firearm that, by the way, has a history of malfunctioning that ultimately led to the shooting. But the fact is, you don't want to start off your official story with something that sounds incredibly false, even if technically, by the technical facts of the case, you can argue it's true. What you want to do in these particular scenarios, and by the way, I never thought I would miss this phrase, is say that there's an ongoing investigation, we're looking into it right now, and we will present to you the results of said investigation as it progresses. Let people on the internet.com speculate, let us break down the video in public view, but don't do this thing where you talk about the guy as if he pulled out the gun and ended up confronting the ICE agents with the firearm when the video does not show that. Again, even though it's technically true that he approached the agents with a firearm, the fact is it is not actually what people think is true when they look at the video. Again, the way it's phrased versus the way it technically is meant is something that we should understand, especially in these hotly contested situations. But that being said, just because Kristi Noem said something poorly phrased, said something inaccurately, said something that honestly doesn't hold up to scrutiny a little bit further on in her actual little press conference, that doesn't mean that the shooting was unjustified. So I think it's important throughout the course of this video for us to break it down, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
Medics were on the scene immediately and attempted to deliver medical aid to the subject, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. The suspect also had 2 magazines with ammunition in them that held dozens of rounds. He also had no ID. This looks like a situation where an individual arrived at this scene to inflict maximum damage on individuals and to kill law enforcement.
So look, while the first part of Kristi Noem's statement was technically factually true, he did in fact approach with a firearm in his possession, it was not drawn upon the reproach, so it seems false when she says it that way. And then Kristi Noem ends up going on to say that this guy was looking to inflict maximum damage on law enforcement, essentially saying that he was a mass shooter waiting for his opportunity. And I'm sorry guys, but right now at this moment, that is not supported by the facts. Now you could make the case that even though Alex Preddy had a license to carry a firearm, had a license to carry in the state of Minnesota, the fact is him showing up without identification and said firearm is obviously not something that is legal. Usually if you have a license to carry, you need to be able to present ID with it, a la in the same way that you have to have your driver's license when you're operating a motor vehicle. But again, the implication that this guy was a mass shooter and he was gunned down by the police is not what people see when they look at the video. So immediately you start off on the wrong foot, creating a situation where people think that you're lying. Now, of course, we end up examining multiple different angles of the video, and what we could see from these angles is that you have a situation where, once again, immigration enforcement is engaged in an operation. You have a bunch of so-called protesters that are disrupting said operation, and the reason I describe them as so-called protesters is because in reality, this would not be an acceptable form of protest against any other law enforcement agency where you're actively obstructing and intervening with their law enforcement operation. So obviously the people that are blowing whistles, blocking traffic, doing all the things that we've seen be encouraged by the Democratic Party time and time again are what is creating this situation, are what is creating the problem. But of course, you have a situation where a woman is in the road, kind of like directing traffic. Preddy at one point in time is directing traffic, and then you have officers trying to move them out of the way. There's actually an earlier angle that I recently saw that shows officers trying to get Preddy out of the way before the woman gets pushed to the ground, which essentially starts the heart of this altercation. But we do have this footage right here of him being shoved aside, him being told to back up, and of course he ends up responding to that woman being shoved to the ground by putting his body in between the woman and the ICE agent. Now, to be clear, this is intervening with law enforcement. We can all see it right here. The agent is focused on that particular woman right there, and Alex Preddy ends up putting his body between this woman and the ICE agent, and a lot of people on the left wing are very disingenuously saying, oh, well, he was just trying to help that woman up. He saw a woman stumble to the ground or get shoved, and he decided to be a good person and intervene in order to help her to her feet, when in reality he already knew that these were agents. That's the reason he was there. He had already been told to back up by these agents. He decided to refuse that and get his body in between what would have been a potential lawful arrest, again, for obstructing federal agents. Again, you can see this on video for yourselves right here. But this is where this incident ends up turning from an obstruction or an intervening in law enforcement or a protest gone awry to a deadly encounter, and a really unfortunate deadly encounter, because then they try to restrain Alex Preddy himself, who of course is pushing back against law enforcement during the course of this restraint.
Here's another thing. His own parents told him not to go. If you do go, don't get in the way of the ICE agents. But he went there. He fucked around. He found out. He played a stupid game. He won a stupid prize. And that prize was his life being taken away. But no. The Democrats are using these people in these areas as pawns. But it is spinning it negatively. So, yeah, what happened to him is sad. He lost his life. But when you're stupid enough to go there and do shit like that, you get your fucking life taken away.
People, what is wrong with you? Honestly.
Now we have this angle of the video from a woman who's like behind the action on the sidewalk. You can hear her screaming throughout the course of the video. It was obtained by Dropsite News, and as you can see, at some point in time when this person is on the ground, you could hear officers shouting, "Gun, gun, he has a gun," and this is because during the course of them trying to wrestle him to the ground, it was discovered that Preddy was carrying a firearm at this moment in time. And by the way, earlier on, I saw in the video, Preddy was like reaching toward his belt line or something like that. Let me show you this frame right here. And I had asked online, because I wasn't sure if this is what Homeland Security was going with as an explanation, if they were making the case that he was reaching for his firearm at this situation. But apparently that is not the case. He was either putting his camera and or phone in his pocket or adjusting his pants or something of the sort, and nothing has been indicated by the officials or anybody on the other side of this shooting that they were saying that he was pulling out the gun at this moment in time. So let me just nix that thing that I had a question about earlier, and let's get back into this particular situation. So look, they're wrestling him. Obviously, you have people shouting, "There's a gun, there's a gun." You can see, if you slow down the video, you have an agent actually draw a firearm, because again, when you hear that the suspect has a gun, the person that you're wrestling with, in this case it's Alex Preddy, this escalates it to a potential deadly force situation. And now apparently this is where tragedy really comes into play, because according to an angle that again is the flip of this, it seems like one of the agents is able to get the gun away from him at this moment in time. However, this gun has actually been the subject of multiple lawsuits because there is a problem with it discharging. Let me play a video of somebody demonstrating this for you guys right here.
Did you see that? Holy crap!
And it looks like on the video that the firearm discharges. So again, you have the slow-mo. Again, the video is grainy. We all understand that. But it looks like a bullet leaves the gun that belonged to the suspect, ends up hitting the ground, and this is what triggers the other agents to fire at the suspect, because again, they just heard gun, 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 and then they thought this guy was shooting at them, not realizing that the gun was removed, so they end up unloading on Alex Preddy, ultimately costing him his life. Now, of course, what doesn't help this situation is that throughout the whole course of the altercation, you have the whistles being blown throughout this. So if anybody had actually shouted that there was a cleared situation, like the gun was cleared, that they had it, that it wasn't in his possession, or anything of the sort before the shot was fired, that is obscured in part by the whistles, by all the chaos that, again, has been stirred up by the Democratic Party. But what we have right here is a situation where Alex Preddy has been tragically shot and killed. And I think a lot of people on the right are overlooking the fact that this was a tragedy, that obviously Alex Preddy's family has a civil case not only against the firearm manufacturer, but against the feds, because the gun was cleared. There was an accidental discharge, again, from what I can see right now, while in the possession of federal agents, and that was misinterpreted as him firing against them, or maybe one of the agents firing, because he thought Alex was getting into a firing position, and thus they unloaded on him, and he ended up losing his life in this particular scenario. Now, legally, obviously, you could make the case that this was a technically justified shooting, and in fact, if you ask me, looking at this in the situation, not with the benefit of hindsight that we all have right now, where we can slow down the video, I can understand why after you hear this guy has a gun, you end up hearing a gunshot go off, and you think that this person is firing a gun. Again, when you have 8 people yelling gun, 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 and then you hear a gunshot, to me, pretty obvious that you would assume, or it's safe to assume, that maybe this guy is firing said firearm, so that is a legitimate perception of a deadly threat, or again, a threat of serious bodily injury, which is the standard that we go on. In fact, the standard deliberately prohibits the use of 20/20 hindsight after the fact in order to judge cases like this, but the idea that this isn't a tragic shooting, regardless of whether or not it is technically legally justified, I think is lost on a lot of people.
This looks like a situation where an individual arrived at the scene to inflict maximum damage on individuals and to kill law enforcement.
Because while Kristi Noem has made extraordinary claims about this individual going to this particular event in order to inflict the maximum amount of damage, she has not provided extraordinary evidence of that. Now, I've seen people say that this guy actually deleted his social media footprint not too long before this particular event. I have not seen that verified by anybody that I actually trust, so we will have to wait on that that a little longer. But again, the idea that this guy was ready to become like a mass law enforcement shooter, and he decided to become that mass law enforcement shooter after he was already thrown on the ground, I think is patently absurd and ridiculous. The idea that you can't carry a firearm to a protest is absurd. Obviously, that is not the issue at hand. The left is trying to make this an issue because they're like, oh, Kyle Rittenhouse, who never, by the way, got into a fight with law enforcement, never interfered with law enforcement, and in fact, when he had an interaction with law enforcement, he ended up throwing his hands up in an unambiguous sign of surrender, had a gun, and we're okay with that. But this completely different scenario, somehow we're against it because of the gun. No, that's not the case. My issue isn't that Preddy had a firearm on him. My issue is that knowing he had a firearm on him, he went to intervene with a law enforcement action, specifically with that woman being detained by law enforcement, and that ended up resulting in a situation where he ended up getting shot, and tragically so.
Lee Randolph, March 30th, 1947, December 10th, 2024. Today we remember that freedom is not free. We have to work at it, nurture it, protect it, and even sacrifice for it. May we never forget and always remember our brothers and sisters who have served so that we may enjoy the gift of freedom. So in this moment, we remember and give thanks for their dedication and selfless service to our nation in the cause of our freedom. In this solemn hour, we render them our honor and our gratitude.
Look, not a lot of right-wing people will play you this video of Alex Preddy reading the last rites to an individual who is in a VA hospital who served our country, as was his job as a VA hospital nurse at one point in time during his life. But I'll play it for you because I do think it's important for you to understand that, yes, this is a human person. He may disagree with you politically. He may have been absurd in his political beliefs. He may have acted dumbly intervening with this particular arrest. But the idea that we should celebrate his death, no, not interested in that. Not about that, because again, it is ultimately a tragedy, and make no mistake about it, it makes the country significantly worse because it enables the worst people in our society to, of course, agitate and instigate even further.
This is a statement from Tricia McLaughlin, spokesperson for DHS. She said in her statement, an individual approached U.S. Border Patrol officers with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun. Seen here, they showed a picture of it. The officers attempted to disarm the suspect, but the armed suspect violently resisted. More details on the armed struggle are forthcoming. Fearing for his life and the lives and safety of fellow officers, an agent fired defensive shots. Medics on the scene immediately delivered medical aid. Is that what happened?
So Minneapolis police, the question was, you read a statement from DHS saying that a weapon was presented and there was attempts to disarm the person. Again, like I stated earlier, Minneapolis police, as well as our supervisors, our watch commander responded to the scene. We were not provided any public safety statement around the incident, what happened. We've since seen a video that is circulating online, like thousands of other people have at this time. So we do not know what happened prior to the recording that is online right now. I immediately called for the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension to respond, to conduct an investigation. They are on the scene. I believe the FBI is on the scene as well. But I think the video speaks for itself.
Now, of course, there was an embarrassing press conference with Jacob Frey, the mayor of Minneapolis, and of course the police chief of Minneapolis, where they didn't even know that Homeland Security was alleging that Preddy had a gun on him, that in fact the video showed that he had a gun on him. And again, the purpose of this press conference is to stoke up more tensions because the left wing is benefiting politically from their own people getting killed in these altercations, which is why they are in fact encouraging them. And in fact, you actually had Tim Walz go up to the gate of the governor's mansion. By the way, the gate is to keep the protesters / rioters away from Tim Walz and pretend like he was behind the gate and he was the one who is actually in danger. And he ends up shouting to people to go out and keep doing what they're doing, even though, again, we have two completely and totally unnecessary bodies on the hands and on the head of Tim Walz.
Served on the China Commission in Congress, ironically enough, as co-chair with Marco Rubio. We used to bring Chinese political prisoners, and we would ask them, when we speak up and call out your government, is it bad? And they said, Well, in the short run, it's bad because they torture us. But if you don't speak up, they will torture us and forget about us. And the idea is right now is we have to be speaking up. We have to call it out. You are doing everything, and our neighbors are doing everything. And I can't stress enough on this. We're winning it because we're doing it with Minnesota grit, Minnesota humor, Minnesota decency. Oftentimes talk about this, and I know people are discussing this a lot. I spent a lot of time with John Lewis on nonviolent resistance. The resistance matters. We're not telling people to be silent, but we're not telling people to go out and cause problems. We're going to cause good trouble.
Because he's encouraging this kind of behavior.
Many of us grew up reading that story of Anne Frank. Somebody's going to write